Now, corruption-accused ANC MP Zizi Kodwa has resigned as a Member of Parliament. In a statement, the ANC Secretary-General Fikile Mbalula says he received Kodwa's formal resignation as an MP on Wednesday. Kodwa had appeared earlier this week in court on corruption charges, and his case has since been postponed to August the 21st. Mbalula says the resignation is with immediate effect and the party has accepted the resignation and wishes Kodwa well. For more analysis on this, let's now welcome political analyst Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast. Prof, always great having you with us. A very good afternoon to you. So you and I had a similar discussion, right, when Zizi Kodwa was actually sworn into Parliament. So what is your take now on his current resignation? I mean, yes, we hear that his name was already submitted as a Member of Parliament, but do you think it was really necessary to be sworn in knowing that he was still facing these charges of corruption?
I don't think that should have happened in the first place. I think the damage is done and what is done cannot be undone, unfortunately, because the swearing in of Zizi Kodwa has not done the ANC any favor. Instead, it has conveyed a message that the ANC is fighting against corruption in theory, not in practice, or the ANC is picking and choosing who they want to apply the step-aside principle to. If you have a principle, you have to apply it across the board. But when you pick and choose who the principle must apply to, then that showcases inconsistency. So I thought the ANC was going to draw a lesson from its poor electoral performance. But again, I think the arrogance of power of the ANC is catching up with them in a big way, because they are still continuing with this political trajectory of taking people for granted and also insulting their intelligence.
Speaking of choosing and picking sides, Professor, I mean, let's talk about that in further detail. The ANC step-aside rule actually precludes anyone facing criminal charges, as you've rightly mentioned, from serving in government or leadership roles. But he was actually nominated on the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, yet the initial statement from the party was that he would be a non-active Member of Parliament.
The ANC has been using the step-aside principle to entrench the hegemony of the dominant faction. So the dominant faction has been using a softy approach to those who belong to their faction, but they've been aggressive against those who belong to the other faction. For instance, just to be more specific, they were quick to apply the step-aside principle to the former Secretary-General of the ANC, Ace Magashula. I'm not saying that should not have happened. If he was out of line, that should have happened. But again, what is source for the goose is source for the gander. What you apply to the left-hand side must also apply to the right-hand side to strike a balance. But in this regard, the mere fact that he was sworn in showcases that they have not been fighting against corruption in good faith.
So a lack of consistency there in terms of their own basic theories as well as step-aside rules. So, Prof, what do you make then of his corruption charges? And do you think then there could be something tangible this time in terms of evidence against him causing him to resign? We don't have much, of course, on the legal front pertaining to his case, except that he's facing corruption charges in relation to him accepting the 1.7 million rand in bribes from business as well as businessman as well as former EOH boss Mr. McKay during his time when he was still the Deputy Minister of State Security. And we know that CJ Zondo had in fact recommended that he be further investigated in this regard in his state capture report as well. Instead, he got promoted. So what are the chances that he could face any prosecution now is, I suppose, the other question.
Yeah, I think the ANC should have been circumspect. They should not have made him, for instance, a minister, because this matter rose to prominence during the Zondo commission, which was meant to uncover the truth about what had happened with regard to institutionalization of corruption. So I think by turning a blind eye, they were showing that they don't take the findings seriously. So I think it's really a very unfortunate turn of events. And when they made him to be sworn in, they conveyed a message and a subtext that, this thing of fighting against corruption is just a politicking. It just depends on which side of the fence you are sitting on.
And I suppose the ANC cannot get away from that stigma, right? But in closing, Prof, then how does this case reflect broader issues of governance and accountability within the ANC?
Well, I think it's good to see people who have big names, being formally charged, because we've been complaining about the extent to which corruption has been practiced. But of course, the burden of proof rests with the accuser, which is the state. So it is the principal responsibility of the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they've got grounds to send him to jail for breaking the law. I hope that this is not going to be one of those cases where the state fails to present its case to court and make the person who is accused of wrongdoing to be punished.